Welcome to a Coil Chat where we're going to break down the Supreme Court arguments from TikTok and ByteDance and content creators that happened on Friday, January 10th. So there's a lot to go down in the arguments that lasted more than 2 hours. And we just kind of want to talk about it. I'll break it down from a legal perspective. As of right now, after watching it, after reading everything about it, I do not know what is going to happen. I have heard a lot of different takes from lawyers on this, and a lot of people think that the Supreme Court is just going to do like an injunction where they're going to stay the January 19th date that TikTok then ends. And that's going to be it. They're going to be done. Then we're going to have more time and everybody's going to be able to breathe, and we're going to have a change in power in the presidency, and it's going to be able to be discussed a little bit more. But again, that's just one of the possibilities. Another possibility is the Supreme Court can just uphold the law that Congress enacted and say that, you know, we're going to uphold the law that Congress said, and therefore TikTok, you have to follow what that law was, which they had to divest by January 19th or they were going to be banned. And now ByteDance has this specifically said, and they re-said in their arguments that they are going to shut the app down in America. If there is not some kind of stay or relief, that they're just going to shut it down. They're going to take it away from America. So one of the things I wanted to say is, I don't know if you know, but China, if you live in China, you're not allowed to look at Facebook, Google, Snapchat, Instagram. They are very, very strict on what they allow their people to see and look at. And so I wanted you to just kind of keep that in mind, because here we are, America, and now we're basically going to ban an app. It's kind of interesting to think, are we doing the same kind of control as China? But you have to remember, like, the biggest argument that the government is making is that TikTok gathers information. All of these apps do. That's why, you know, if you can be Googling, you know, for something on your phone, and then all of a sudden on Facebook, you see an ad for exactly what you're Googling, or you are talking about it and your phone's listening, and all of a sudden you see ads for it, banner ads on YouTube or whatever. Meta is doing the same thing. They collect all your data and then they sell it to the highest bidder. You know, when you get ad space, when you specifically buy ad space you can design it to reach the people that you wanted to reach. That's how these apps make money. That's why Mark Zuckerberg is as rich as he is, because he's been able to perfect that. So the argument is that ByteDance is doing the same thing. And there's no argument that they're doing anything different than Meta or Facebook, but that they are beholden to the Chinese government because they are a Chinese company. And therefore the Chinese government can demand that information for their own benefit. And whether that is to, you know, persuade elections, to bring out false advertisement. You know, they talk a lot about the fact that TikTok can pick and choose what they're going to put on their app. So, and to be fair, as a TikTok user and somebody that is, you know, posts videos on TikTok, I specifically see how, and I do feel very confused by some of the posts that I do that do not do well on TikTok. It's very hit and miss on TikTok, but I'll get videos that will get under 1,000 views. I have, you know, over 30,000 followers on TikTok, and I'll get views on a video and then it will specifically do so poor, but yet I'll get comments and I'll have interaction on this video that's just not doing very well. And you're like, why? And then over here on Instagram, the same exact video is blowing up and people are loving it and the interaction is there. So I do find a lot of confusion on the algorithm, what it wants, and how you make it big. I do feel like, you know, getting a viral video now does not guarantee you getting followers, getting growth, making money, or anything like that. I do know, and I can say this, TikTok will pay you way more money than Instagram. I mean, Facebook and Instagram pay you like nothing, like pennies. That's where I get my views. I mean, I've had over 2 million views in just the last month. And when you look at that, you're like, oh, 2 million views, that's pretty good. You should be making some money. And I think I've made $25 off of that. Yeah, just my views from December 11th to January 9th has been 3,167,000 on Instagram. And I've made $38. Whereas if you go to my TikTok and you go and you look at that, to be like super fair and transparent, I've had 18,000 views, qualified views in the last 7 days, and I made $68 because of that. So 18,000 qualified views, I've made 68, and I've had over 3 million on Instagram, and I've made $40. You do the math. So there is a lot of things that I just don't understand about the app. So let's just break down the Supreme Court and what they did. So Chief Justice John Roberts, he convened, And the first person that was going to go was Noel Francisco. This is how this goes. Supreme Court, you get up there, you have 2 minutes to present your case, and you need to get your list of everything that you want to get out, because the real meat and strength of your argument comes after you talk, which is when the Supreme Court asks you questions. I love this. Like when I was in law school, this is what I wanted to do. I did mock trial. I would get up here and I would do, pretend Supreme Court arguments. Some lawyers were just bred for it. I love it. I appreciate these attorneys that are up there fighting for their cause and what they're doing. And I can tell you this, it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. You are nervous as get out. Like you are so nervous when you get out there. But I thought Noel did a really good job. So Noel is arguing this, and he specifically just argues that this cannot stand. He urged the court for a temporary ban at the minimum is what they wanted to do. And ByteDance and TikTok's, their argument all along has been this is against the First Amendment. You are shutting people's ability for free speech. And this is a case of first precedence because nobody's ever done this. And why is this Chinese owned company where there's, hundreds and thousands of other Chinese companies being targeted so much? And then the justices come out. And just so you guys know, all 9 justices were there. And all of them asked questions, which you got your cowboys who have to ask a question, which is why Justin Clarence Thomas was the first one to ask a question. You knew that was going to happen. But then you get your very, very smart justices that are like very methodical and very, careful about their question and what they want to answer. And then you get your people that just like hear something and they just want, what? Like clarify this. Like, what are you talking about? And so we got a lot of that. And it was really, really interesting. But Justice Thomas said that you're converting the restriction on ByteDance ownership of the algorithm and the company into a restriction on TikTok speech. So why can't we simply look at the restriction on ByteDance? And his question is an interesting take because they're saying that we're violating everybody's free speech by banning TikTok. And the government's argument to that has always been, no, we're not. First of all, ByteDance doesn't have a right to free speech. It's not an American company. It's a Chinese-based company. And we have said that we will keep TikTok, but it needs to divest and just sell to an American company. So that was Thomas's question. I think Thomas is pretty leaning on just upholding the ban. You could kind of see that from him. Then you've got Justice John Roberts. I think he is one of the most intelligent and smartest guys up on the bench. I respect him in the way that he was a lawyer and what he does on the bench. But he said this, are we supposed to ignore the fact that the ultimate parent is in fact subject to doing intelligent work for the Chinese government? And what he's saying is that there's some kind of like law or something in China where if you are a company on Chinese grounds, you are basically innate to give them the information if they so want it. I mean, they're a communist nation. It makes sense, right? If you're going to benefit by being a company on their soil, then they basically control you. And Justice Roberts just pointed that out. He's like, we're not going to ignore that. We know that that is fact. And Roberts specifically called out Francisco, who just seems to always ignore the concerns of Congress, namely the ability of the Chinese government to covertly manipulate content on TikTok and collect vast swaths of American data. Francisco, he raised a hypothetical that I thought was interesting, and to show how the ban affects TikTok. He says, asking justices to imagine the Chinese government using leverage over Amazon founder Jeff Bezos' international empire to force the Washington Post to write favorable articles about China. The U.S. government, he said, couldn't require Bezos to shut down the Post or sell it. And so that was kind of the hypothetical that TikTok is trying to make, is that where does the line stop? If you're stopping it here for TikTok, then where does it end? Shouldn't we be going further with this? And I think that is a very valuable argument in that why TikTok? And we're going to get to this because there was another person made a really good comparison, like Temu, that has had all this scandal in the last couple of years because we find out in China, it's owned by Chinese company. And we find out, there's like possibility of children trafficking and labor with it and all this fun stuff. And they use that as an example of, well, if you're banning TikTok, why aren't you banning Temu? I mean, that they're all over your For You page. You click on one of their ads for something, even if you don't know it's Temu, and then you're getting ads for Temu for like the rest of your life, right? That's their argument. I thought it was a pretty valid argument with that. So then Kavanaugh and Alito, they start to probe and ask their questions. So Kavanaugh was the one who asked about the lower court's decision in favor of the U.S. government, particular Chief Judge Sri Srinivasan's concurring opinion, finding that there is a long history of regulatory restriction on foreign control of mass communication channels. And so they were just pointing out that this isn't like the first impression for this. It's been done, but just in different ways, different venues, different. This is just the most, I would say, public and the most time that anybody's talked about it, right? Because there's millions of people on TikTok and people like TikTok. And then Justice Alito is now posing his own hypothetical. He says, if TikTok was totally controlled by a foreign government, wouldn't that be different than the platform's current ownership structure? And I think that makes sense, right? Like, is there a difference between the Chinese government owning it and then ByteDance owning it? And Francisco, he noted that there are many companies in the US who have foreign ownership, such as the news outlet Politico, which has German owners. In this instance, he said there is a bona fide US company. I think that was an interesting take. And I kind of agree with that. Like, there's a lot of rich people in China, and a lot of our companies go to China because labor is cheap and manufacturing is cheap. It's so expensive to manufacture a product. I mean, this is just 95% of the things that you get on Amazon are being manufactured in China. We know that, made in China. That's not just a coincidence. And so for us to be that now arguing that, somehow there is some government entanglement and that TikTok is the one company that is somehow breaching that, it, in my mind, as a legal argument, I'm thinking, yeah, there's some gray area there, because where does it end? Where does the government entanglement stop? If we're saying that China has complete control over going into independently owned companies, even if they're Chinese-based companies, and being able to tell them they want their data, where does it end? It would mean everything would have to stop in China. And I think that that's a valid argument. And I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will address that specifically in their decision, because I would like to know more about that. So then Justice Gorsuch, he posed a series of questions to Francisco to clarify facts of the case, including about TikTok's powerful algorithm that determines what content to serve. So this was the funniest part of this. And this is where you kind of saw the age of the Supreme Court, is that they're talking a lot about, well, can anybody just repeat the algorithm for TikTok? Somebody else can just make it. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that special. And I giggle at that because, first of all, I'm a tech company owner. I've created tech to be able to bring affordable divorce documents right to your home. It's called simpleending.com. Go check it out. I have created that, and I can tell you how hard tech is, how much money it's cost, how much time invested, and how expensive it is to get the market to buy it. And you know what? ByteDance had, money, so they were able to get TikTok, and TikTok was able to take off. But think of all of these other huge companies that have created social media platforms in the last couple of years that you think, oh, they're going to take off, and they just don't. I mean, I can think of like Clubhouse. When that came out, everybody was like, Jill, you got to get in Clubhouse. Okay, I'll go get in Clubhouse. You don't hear about Clubhouse anymore. Blue Sky, that's going to be like the alternate to Twitter or X, whatever. Is it like, it is not as easy as I felt like these justices were trying to make it out. Like, if it was that easy, there would be another TikTok. It'd be called TikTok, or it would already be there, and Americans would be going over to it. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then Barrett, she was the one who I thought was asking an interesting question about, am I right that the algorithm is the speech here? Because she keeps trying to hone down on is whose free speech are we violating? I think that's really, really important, because if you remember, or maybe you don't know, but your constitutional rights are for the people. So you have to have a specific person to be able to have your inalienable rights. The Constitution was written that way. It's for you and it's for me. Who's the person in this? And I really liked what she said, because what Francisco argued is he said the algorithm is a lot of things, and basically how we predict that our customers want to see. What we're talking about is the editorial discretion that underlines the algorithm. And I just want to be clear, a lot of your examples talk about, including the Bezos one, the right of an American citizen to repeat what foreign entities say. Here's the concern is about the covert content manipulation piece of the algorithm. That is something that ByteDance wants to speak, right? And then Francisco said that ultimately it's TikTok's choice whether to put it on the platform, and that TikTok and ByteDance absolutely resist any content manipulation by China. The problem is, just thinking through this legally, is ByteDance might not want to allow China to use their information or to manipulate the algorithm. But what if China says you don't have a choice? And that's the biggest argument, and that's the biggest concern. Barrett was the one who says, I'm trying to figure out what content, if any, discrimination is going on here. And that goes to another thought in my mind is that ByteDance or TikTok already discriminates. Because like I said, some videos do really, really well and some videos don't. And they claim that it's based off of if people are watching it. But I know for a fact that's not true. If your video gets flagged, it doesn't get pushed out. If if it's content that it doesn't like or it's flagged you not liking, I have videos that I know if I say this word, and to be fair, it's a person's name. If I say it in my videos will not do well. I just know that. And it's not because my users don't like it, because my Instagram videos do very, very well. So you see where I'm going with that. So I think that that's a very interesting argument. And I appreciated Justice Barrett bringing it up. That's when Kagan kind of steps in. He's like, so how are TikTok's First Amendment rights are implicated? And this is where I find that if they address this very specific topic, it's going to be talked about in law school in perpetuity, because who is entitled to First Amendment rights? I love that. It was something that we talked about in con law, which was one of my worst classes, but it is a very interesting subject to dive into. Who are the people? Who is afforded this alienable right? And that's what they're trying to say. Is it a foreign company? And they're saying that, is it the followers of TikTok? No, because, well, at least this is what he was alluding to, is that the TikTok company does not have those rights, but that the people listening may have those rights. But it's TikTok choosing then to not sell their private whatever to an American company. And that's where like the line draws. It's a very interesting subject. And I just think it's so funny and so interesting. But after all of this, after 40 minutes into arguments, it just felt very like the justices were for the government. Like, this ban's going forward and this is what we're going to do. But that's usually what happens when you hear all these questions and they're just being like interrogated, right? What I learned is that we know this, that through the Congress investigation and them enacting this law, there was super secret national security information that was not released to the public. This was then put in as an exhibit into the arguments and sealed. So we still don't know what it is. The justices were implored to open the exhibit, the sealed document, and read it. And they said that in there is proof that there are these national security problems. And, as an attorney, I'm like, man, just show us. We've heard this so much. It's like, what do they have? But it will be interesting to see if those are addressed, if the justices actually look at the super secret national security stuff and we find out what that is. And Kavanaugh was the one who was like, so what happens if we decide to side with the government? And that's when the Francisco, he confirmed that TikTok's going to go dark, that they're just going to shut down their app. And I was like, oh, that sucks. That sucks for so many people that depend on this app to make money and for their businesses. That's just really hard to hear, but that's what they said. And Kavanaugh then said, but if they divest, one of the things we have to think about too, legally or just generally, is why don't they divest? People do this all the time. Just sell your portion of the American company. You'll make billions of dollars and you'll own it for the rest of the world. It's just America that you won't. I would imagine in the divestiture agreement that they can own stock in the company still, so they can still make money from the American subsidiary that owns it. But it will be owned by somebody that, is beholden to the American government and not the Chinese government. And I laugh at that because think about it. Doesn't that sound a little ridiculous? That's basically what they're saying, that if you're beholden to the American government, you're not guaranteed to be crooked or to sell people's information or to sway elections, because we all know that that's laughable. Because it happens no matter what. Justice Brown Jackson was the one who asked the first questions of, when she asked her questions, first of all, I really appreciate her. I think she's a very, very smart justice, but she said this: if TikTok were to post-divestiture or pre-divestiture come up with its own algorithm, then when the divestiture happens, it could still operate, she told. It doesn't say, TikTok, you can't speak. And she made clear, she's like, it doesn't say that TikTok, you have to go mute, because TikTok can continue to operate on its own algorithm, on its own terms, as long as it's not associated with ByteDance. So isn't this really about association? I thought that was really, again, TikTok could sell and go be its own company, right? Why are they so against selling? Like, just start a company in Mexico or wherever else and own TikTok. It has to beg the question of why they're digging their heels in. A lot of it has to make you wonder if it's because the Chinese government is like, nope, you cannot give up this, right? It's something to look about. And I know that the justices are thinking about that. Like, what's the big deal? People sell off parts of their company all the time. Like, why do you have to stay in full control? So after an hour and 12 minutes, we finally, Noel gets done and he sits down. So now the lawyer for the TikTok creators begins argument. And that was Jeffrey Fisher. He's the co-director of the Supreme Court Litigation Clinic at Stanford Law. And he was the one arguing on behalf of 8 creators challenging the ban. He says, under the First Amendment, mere ideas do not constitute a national security threat. Restricting speech because it might sow doubt about our leaders or undermine our democracy are kinds of things our enemies do. It is not what we do in our country. And that has been the biggest thing, is they think that the government is trying to shut down our ability to use TikTok in the way it's been, to receive news, to sell products, to use it as a way for the people to get more information, since, you know, the news agencies have become so swinged into the direction or the sport that they are. I think that that's a valid argument. A lot of young people, including myself, get most of their news from TikTok, and it will be interesting. I'm like, oh man, I'll have to go back to Apple News, which I absolutely hate. And how am I going to get my news? You know, that's when Roberts highlights data concerns. Again, Congress doesn't care about what's on TikTok. And so he wanted to just emphasize the fact that we are not talking that what's on TikTok is the problem here. And they really want the American people and everybody to hear that it's not that they're trying to ban the content that's on it. They're trying to ban the Chinese government from being able to gather our data and then use that against us on the app. It's a valid argument. They talked a lot about whether Trump can extend the deadline. Trump wrote a letter to the Supreme Court saying that he supports that they do like an injunction or a temporary stay on the ban until it can be fully briefed or negotiated or whatever. Then there was some argument, well, can Trump even stay it? And it seems from the argument of the Supreme Court justices, he cannot stay by an executive order or anything like that, law that Congress enacted. So from what it all looks like, everybody agrees with that. Like, Trump doesn't really have a lot of power. And here, the ban goes in on January 19th, which is the last day of Biden's administration. And then Trump takes office on January 20th. The interesting thing is they did say, well, could you shut down on January 19th? And then Trump reinvigorated it on January 20th. But it seems like even the attorneys didn't know the answer to that. They were very like, I don't know enough about whether the president has the executive power to be able to, you know, stay. And so I think what it really came down to is that they use that as the ability to say that's why you should stay it through the Supreme Court to give us more time. So I thought that was a pretty good reaction to that. It was kind of funny. Then Justice Alito asked his question, and he was like, he compared it to an old t-shirt. He says, I mean, I really love this old shirt because I've been wearing this old shirt, but I could go out and buy something exactly like that. But no, I like this old shirt. Is that what we have? He asked Fisher. You guys have to remember, like, most of these justices are old, to the point where they didn't have typewriters, like computers, when they were like full on doing their work as a lawyer. They were writing on legal pads and using typewriters. And so it just made me laugh, because when he made it seem like, oh yeah, I love TikTok, but I'll go and I'll find it somewhere else. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's an old t-shirt. And I'm like, where is that app? If there was another app out there that was just as good or just as liked as TikTok, people would be on it. Instagram is very specific to the way it does it. YouTube is and that's why it's like, well, I got to get my YouTube going so people can have a different platform for them to get the information that they want. But so then about 11:49, about an hour and 50 minutes into this, we finally get to hear from the government. And this was Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar. Yay. I loved her argument. I love women. I love what she was able to do. And not saying that I agree with her argument, but I'm just saying I felt like she did a really good job. But she argued and said the important thing to recognize is that the act leaves all of that speech unrestricted once TikTok is freed from foreign adversary control. She said, the First Amendment does not bar Congress from taking that critical and targeted step to protect our nation's security. So I thought it was actually interesting that she did kind of tie the fact that maybe ByteDance has First Amendment rights, but that she then alluded that the government has the ability to take away First Amendment rights if national security. I think that's a really hard line to cross, right? Because there has to be some checks and balances. And I don't know. Anyways, I thought that was an interesting argument that she opened up with. So it was interesting because Roberts made a joke after this. He says, did I understand you to say a few minutes ago that ByteDance might be through TikTok trying to get Americans to argue with each other? If they do, I'd say they're winning. And that was pretty funny. People are like, ha ha ha, he made a joke. So I think it lightened the room a little bit well. But what she said is that might be very well true. The point I'm trying to make is that China is a foreign adversary nation that looks for every opportunity it has to weaken the United States and threaten our national security. I think that's true. Who has the best national security in the world? Us. Strongest military presence? Us. Why would adversary countries not be looking for every possible way to weaken that or to hurt us? It's definitely something to put into play. So then the arguments passed the 2-hour mark. That's only what the Supreme Court allowed for these arguments. So you were worried that maybe they were going to cut them off, but they don't. And then it was interesting because the Solicitor General, Prologus, she said she was not prepared to take a position on whether Trump can extend the deadline. And I was like, I would have been like researching that with your associates, like figure that out, but I don't know. It's so convoluted. And when you're going down to just the bare of the Constitution, it's like there's nothing in the Constitution. So you're going through laws and different things, but we're trying to find loopholes. I mean, that's what we do as attorneys. We find a law and we interpret it in 100 different ways to benefit whatever side of the law we want to be on. But she did say that TikTok can return if sold after January 19th. So basically affirming that we would allow TikTok back if they want to sell past this. So we're going to see. She then is the one who talked about the sealed information. And she's like, it's eye-opening, she adding that there is a wealth of information about Americas that would have to go back to China. She did then kind of say that she believes the president could decide not to enforce a law. So I felt like that was a contradiction to her earlier argument, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that. And obviously there was just a lot of back and forth. There was social media companies got a lot of shout outs, Blue Sky, Meta, X. And this is just, again, a very interesting take on what is going to happen. I went through the entire argument. If you're still with me, thank you. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. Now, part of me is thinking they're just going to put a stay on it so that they can really define some of these questions that I think they need to be very careful about. Like, who is entitled to the First Amendment right? And when is it affected? And if we're worried about TikTok, why aren't we worried about other Chinese companies? Like, I think those are some very, very careful questions that the Supreme Court really have to talk about. And if they're really going to protect us from national security, they shouldn't just be doing it from TikTok, right? They should be looking at the myriad of companies that are owned by adversarial governments that are possibly trying to use it to gather information about us and then somehow hurt us. It will be really, really interesting. But then again, they could just come back and say, no, we're going to uphold the law. So as of right now, I can't tell you. I thought it was very even keel. And I'm like, wow, this could go anyway. In the comments, let me know what you think. And then we'll do obviously an update. Follow me on all my social media platforms. Just my name, Jill Coyle. And to get all the latest information.